Hey, good morning, guys. This one's going to be a subscribers only video again, right? So, look, what what I've been looking at is this particular move that I talked about yesterday in the musing channel, right? Now, obviously, I've been tracking and trading euro these last couple of months, even on a smaller time frame, right? Now, one of the things I've done on a smaller time frame is I've been a bit more aggressive in terms of just taking the bias, kind of going with the bias, and then kind of loading up in terms of the value per pip. Now, I wouldn't advise that. This is obviously me, kind of just playing with it, just kind of almost for the sake of playing with it, knowing that the bias is kind of always on my side. So one of the things that I've looked at, right, is just like yesterday's move with, you can see the difference between the impulsive nature and this kind of, descending move down, very slow, very, just kind of weak in the grand scheme of things, right? There's no real selling pressure, but there's obviously no buyers sitting there. So the way to kind of, get to grips with this is to understand where these buyers and sellers are actually sitting, right? So the one thing I was looking at this morning is this on a very small time. This is 1 minute time frame, right? So what we have is we have some liquidity from over here, right? So this is like the first thing you can do. And again, I've shown this on the bigger time frames. I still advise going out to the daily, to that weekly, right? And so on, so on. So as you can see, right, we had this kind of big move up, right? And again, it's on a 1 minute time frame, so it's not too big, right? Now, yesterday's bias was we would literally do this. We'd go up, we'd come back, retest, and off we go. We hit then the 4 hour line, right? So you can start to see how these things kind of piece together, why they come together, where they are, and how they interact with each other, right? So all I've done on this smaller time frame, and this is the type of thing that I'm looking for, right? And I'm kind of playing with on these smaller time frames. Although the bias is still the daily, I'm looking for the 4 hour change and then that 15 minute in terms of a decent entry. I'm spending a bit more time working on these smaller time frames, or kind of just observing the smaller time frames 9 times out of 10, right? I do take some trades on the smaller ones, but as I said earlier, what I tend to do is align my bias bigger picture. I'm looking at the charts, and because I'm sat in front of it and I'm kind of going, right, this is going to do this and this is going to do that, I'm just literally waiting for one of these breaks. As soon as that break comes in, I'm just buying or selling, taking a couple of pips and walking away, right? So it's a very, very simplistic scalping strategy. But it's not my kind of bread and butter. This is, something I tend to do after I've had one trade, two trades in the week that are actually, kind of well in my favor. If I take a 3% or a 4% on a Monday, then Tuesday just allows me that little bit of freedom of, even if I lost, three or four times in a row, I'm kind of back to where I started rather than, oh, I'm down negative because I've been scalping on this 1 minute time frame, right? So what I'm looking at, right, is bigger picture, right? First of all, and the bigger picture bias. Now, I've talked about the bias for me is actually currently up, right, in terms of the pullback move. We have taken liquidity, right? So what we are seeing from the take of liquidity on the intermediate time frame is we see in the pullback of a pullback, right? Now, if we look at what's going on down here, we're actually seeing a very nice kind of mini accumulation pattern, right? Now, the issue being is without going too much in depth and without going into Wyckoff and looking at the Elliott count, it's on a minute time frame, right? It's not it's not really interesting for me. What I'm looking at is what we took in terms of liquidity here, right? So this was the sell side liquidity. We then basically moved up and rejected, right? So it's a good sign that we've kind of swept liquidity in this one candle. We've rejected. We've come straight back down, and then we failed, right? So we've got a pretty solid base to begin with, right? Now, the unfortunate issue is we do have a larger block there, right? So this is where you got to be very careful, especially scalping these things. Now, if I look at what we've then done from our kind of solid base, right? We've come up, but we kind of failed to make new highs or sustain new highs right there. That would have been the optimal thing, would have been having this move here, right? It would have been the continuation there. That would have been the optimal move, and then back into the range, and then ultimately, up and off, right? Now, we didn't do that first time round, which means, these become kind of equal highs, right? These become equal lows, giving us very, very small pockets of liquidity, right? Up and above and down and below, right? So if I'm looking at the bigger picture, it wouldn't be a surprise to me to see this kind of mini accumulation going on, right? We then come up and we sweep up for liquidity. So again, I want to look, back to the left in terms of what's there. So first things first, auction area, right? I'm just going to put a box, kind of all the way over this. We've come up and we've again failed to sustain any momentum up and above there, right? We've got the very last buy before you sell candle up there, right? We didn't quite tag that, okay? So these are the kinds of areas that, although there's lots of boxes now on the chart, I'm just working through very slowly, right? Very kind of softly. And, once you get used to it, this is like 10 seconds worth of analysis, right? This isn't the, oh, I need to look at this and I need to look at that. We just kind of given ourselves a little bit of, logic as to why, what, where, what's going on. Okay. So if I take this particular low and I see a rejection, right, and we failed to take out these highs, we then come back down. We got this low. And again, we failed. Sorry. We failed to take out the highs kind of again. All of this becomes, a bigger interesting area, right? It becomes kind of the box in the future, right? So I'm going to look at two things. I'm going to look at now across to the right, put the magnitude null, and I'm going to look at the last sell before the buy, right? There's an interesting area, okay? We get rid of that and get rid of this and get rid of the box. So there's the last kind of interesting. I'm going to change that box color, make it a bit easier for you guys to understand, right? So when I'm then looking at this in terms of, whether it's a master pattern or whatever, all I'm seeing, right, and this is where these things kind of collide and come together, all I'm seeing is a large kind of cluster, right? This large kind of, whether it's accumulation, distribution, it's kind of irrelevant, right? Now what I'm seeing is, if I was to draw a 50% marker through this, I'm actually seeing an expansion phase, right? And therefore, if I was to measure the expansion, chances are we can get a 50% move, sweeping this liquidity, right, into a larger rejection, and then ultimately up and off, right? Because my bias is still to the upside in the pullback phase. My mini time frame is kind of playing around with these levels at these particular points, right? I can see, a very simple kind of consolidation that's being created by the failure of the sustained move up, right? And therefore, I'm expecting some kind of expansion phase. Now, when I'm looking at short in these or long in these types of moves, right, all I'm looking for is my bias, right? So I can see this bias and say, right, that liquidity has now been taken. The next level of liquidity hasn't been taken, right? My bias is ultimately to the upside medium term, right? Short, medium term, because again, I'm on a minute time frame for this particular, point. And what I'm looking for is, I'm just looking at, if this is a master pattern type move here, what we've done in terms of sustaining the, the current level, right, is it doesn't mean, and especially on a minute time frame, it doesn't mean that wants to hold, right? So if I was to draw my box, my yellow box is obviously the kind of area of the center line, right? I'm going to come up to these highs, probably there, right? Which means it's probably a little bit deeper, okay? So what I'll do is I'll put on my kind of master pattern type concept there, right? I'm going to come from the 50% of the liquidity box, the last, sell before you buy candle, as well as the the 50% marker there, right? So I'm going to overlap these two things there, right? So I want to then get rid of this, and that's kind of the key area, right, for me. Now what I want to do is not trade a bounce or anything off that, because the chances are, so I can drag that out, the chances are we might end up bouncing from here. Now this is where it gets a little bit more technical, right? What I'm looking for is not to predict up or down, I want to work with the chart to say, right, if we were to drop through this, the obvious area is to drop, to come back up to test these sides, right? To come in and sweep, and then to rock it up, right? Now, that's the first option. The second option is if we fail to drop through this and this kind of holds as a base, we're likely to want to come up to this, back to this kind of region, right? And you know, this is going to be a few kind of wiggly lines, right? Then ultimately down and through, we might come back and retest this. Then obviously even this, right? Back to this, then through this, right? And then what I'd like to see is that break, you know, all the way through this, right? Now, at this particular point, I've put no indicators on. There's nothing there in terms of, you know, stochastic or anything else, no volume. But this is where you can start to drill down and drill down even more, right? So I'm only working on the, again, the kind of the mechanical structure, the if this, then that type of momentum, right? And therefore I'm working with the chart rather than kind of predicting the chart, right? So what I want to do now is I want to wait for one of these two events. Now, if we come up to this, I'm going to want to see a change of character back down, right? And on a minute time frame, I could take a change of character and take, you know, a very simplistic, even if I was to show you something like this. And again, please don't, you know, don't take this. This isn't the type of move that, you know, I want you to take without kind of understanding. I'm trying to give you the understanding before you start looking to take these types of moves, right? So move one could be something like this, and I'd come just above that, and then ultimately come on down to this kind of level, right? There's a 7% trade sitting in there. The second option is obviously a long position from that base, right? Which would be kind of similar. Probably come a little bit deeper on this, right? But again, this isn't, you know, to trade it. This is just to show you this, right? So the general idea is to take something like this. I'd come just below, right? Or even, you know, 50% marker. So let's go 25% for argument's sake. And then what I'd do is I drag this back out. Now this time I'd come to the top of this, right? Because obviously we've got a, you know, a liquidity sweep that would be expected, right? And that's obviously an 8% trade. So the one of the things, you know, kind of to see, to visualize, to understand is instead of just jumping in and saying, oh, up or down, is to understand why up or down, right? And even playing around on this 1 minute time frame, I'm still trying to align my biases on that larger time frame, right? So if the 15-minute, now, you know, let me show you this. If the 15-minute, for example, is, let's see, if the 15-minute stochastic, and I'm just going to look at the stochastic just to give me some kind of visual, the 15-minute stochastic is more or less ready to come up, right? So we've had a couple of these moves to the upside. We're probably filling the wick as we speak. As long as we don't tap this higher level here, right? This is only a wick fill. I'd like to see a liquidity sweep down. That will then give us, you know, definitely oversold situation on the 15. And then my bias is to come back down to the 1 minute, the 3 minute, the 5 minute, you know, whatever you want to trade on this. Let's look at the 5 minute as well. So again, the 5 minute look is starting to, you know, to point downwards there. I'd like to see that into the oversold, which means, yeah, I'd like to see a liquidity sweep underneath, right? And then back down on these tiny time frames for you a larger, you know, 7.5, 8.5. Oh, I don't want custom there. You know, rather than the, you know, the 3-to-1s, 4-to-1s. Some of these can easily give you, you know, a 7-to-1, 8-to-1 plus, right? And these are the types of trades that I'm not taking regular. I'm not taking daily. Although you probably could if you get into it. It's one of those ones that after taking a 3 or a 4% trade on a Monday, taking, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, even Thursday, if you want to play with some of these, you only need to catch one or two to give you, you know, a month's worth of, you know, kind of regular type trading. And this is a good situation, a good position to be in. But either which way, it's always taking the logic, right? It's always understanding and appreciating the logic, right? Here's the start of that down move. Although we didn't drop straight down there, we still didn't take the liquidity out here, right? So again, I'm not taking the level, right? Don't confuse this for, you know, use an entry signal because, oh, we've dropped down to the zone, right? We've back in and we've rejected from that sell side liquidity once more, right? I'm still seeing, pointing down 5 minute, 3 minute, right? So I would like to see still a move down. I'm not going to go and buy this, right? What I'm looking for is on that 1 minute time frame, I'm looking to see a rejection from that area, pull back to that area, right? And then in an ideal world, something like that, right? Now, all that means is, although it's a similar thing or could be a similar thing, all it actually means is instead of taking that particular low, right? Let's just say that this plays itself out, and it might not. We might sweep the high first. Is I would then be taking the entry from this level, not that level, right? And this is just an example. And my stop loss now would come below the low, either there or there, right? So I'm still getting, it's probably a 5-6% trailing, go obviously to the upside of that, right? Yes, this is just over a 4% trade, right? So all I'm doing is I'm working with the chart until the chart gives me, conditions that say, yes, let's go. Don't force it. Don't rush it. Don't push it, right? Work with the chart until a chart gives you one of your 2 or 3 examples, right? And that's the main difference between, oh, well, I jumped in because, you said it's going down. No, the point being is understanding what you were working with, right? Understanding where the liquidity is, understanding where the movements are likely to move and why. These are the core differences between, trading professionally and doing this day in, day out, than actually making, one particular move that does this on a, monthly time frame. The beauty of understanding your much bigger bias is my bias is up, right? So I'd prefer to be buying. Do I want to be buying at these levels? No. The reason I don't want to be buying at these levels is that, we're taking out highs, right? I want the pullback move to give me the optimal position. Now, if I get this pullback type move, the beauty of this particular one on a 1 minute time frame coming into a 15 is the chances are the 30 minute, the 1 hour, the 4 hour might be aligned for my bigger bias, right? Which means I'm buying not so much the bottom, I'm not trying to catch the bottom, I'm trying to catch the confirmation that the bigger time frames are about to change in my favor, right? So the 1 minute is confirming the 15 minute for me, and that 15 minutes pointing up, right? At that particular stage, I might not even need this as my take profit, right? I could trail the stop, and I could be looking at where's the next level. Right? I could be looking at this level up here, for example. Right? I could be looking at the next level is another level above that because that's the 4 hour. Right? The next one is up, way, way, way high. Right? Now, at this particular point, this is the type of area. Right? You're looking at another 10% opportunity. So I'm just working with the chart for the chart to confirm what my bias is pointing, what direction my bias is pointing in. All right. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it like that. Thanks for watching, guys. See you on the next stream. Cheers all.